Redditors who witnessed a murder. What is your story? Part 2. Witnessed my friend get hit by a drunk driver while we were skating. He was killed on impact. I was 13 years old. It had a profound effect on me. The details are a little fuzzy. But I remember walking up to his body and seeing his head mangled from coming into contact with the radiator fan and everyone screaming. Was 15 and I was walking with a couple friends who were my neighbors in elementary school. We were walking around the old neighborhood when a car did a drive-by as a gang initiation. One friend was hit several times, including the head. My other friend was hit twice in the chest and once in the neck. I had them both die in my arms while I was trying to stop the bleeding. 13 years later and I still think of it almost daily. I saw a few in Mexico. The most memorable one was the first one I saw while I lived there. I was cleaning out a house with some buddies of mine. A guy was walking down the block. We heard gunshots. I looked out the window and there was that same guy laying out on the sidewalk. A black pickup truck sped by. I think there were 4 guys on back. All with bandanas covering their faces. All with guns in their hands. The thing that stuck with me is they all looked younger than me. I was 22 at the time. According to the paper that was released right after he was from out of town and likely they mistook him as someone else. He was 17. His blood was left on the streets for days. One of my friends said he heard 14 shots but I only heard 6. I have the whole experience written down as it was so foreign to me. This was in Altamirano. I used to stay up late at night trying to think of what kind of life would lead those guys to do a drive-by like that. I also wonder about that 17-year-old. I'm sure he had family visiting there. I was 6 to 7 years old playing with my sister in our backyard. We heard something and thought it was just a firecracker since firecrackers are normal in our country. Then we heard screaming and out of nowhere, a man was running in our backyard. He stopped for a moment, looked at us then jumped off the fence. We went to the front yard to see what was going on and saw our neighbor being carried to a car, to be taken to the hospital. We couldn't understand what was happening until my mother ushered us inside and said our neighbor was shot. After a few days some witnesses said the guy who shot him ran into our yard and that's the only time we realized the guy we saw was the murderer. Police never asked us about anything. TBH. I couldn't remember his face. It happened so fast. All I could remember was the screams I heard. While leaving a RZA concert in 2007, 2 drunk men accidentally bumped into each other and exchanged words which quickly turned to blows and spilled into the street in front of the venue. One of the guys was trying to walk away from it with his hands up while the other was clearly the aggressor. Just as it looked like it was over, a Suburban pulled up and the aggressor walked over to the passenger side, opened up the door, grabbed a gun, and turned around and shot the guy who was walking away from point blank range at least 5 times and then turned and started firing into the crowd as well. The dude was dead in the street. I don't remember ever hearing if they caught the guy, but I distinctly remember what he looked like. Crazy time. I live in Syria and I've been forced to leave my house due to ISIS attacks on our city. My family and I lived for 2 days under light artillery between ISIS soldiers and regime-affiliated troops that lived in the neighborhood. As I looked through the window I saw an ISIS soldier running with a rocket launcher screaming. Then there was a hole in the building in front of him and the 3 men inside were blown to pieces. He quickly got shot in the chest and laid on the ground, dead. Oddly enough. And lucky for me, this incident didn't make a permanent damage on my well-being. I speak of it with the family sometimes to remember how we miraculously managed to survive. When I was a kid I witnessed a hit and run. An SUV ran into a pedestrian and sped away. I don't think they ever caught the person. The poor girl they hit flew into the air. The SUV passed underneath her. She landed on the road and she died. It was heartbreaking. She couldn't have been over 25 years old. Granted this wasn't murder, but I just couldn't believe there was a person there 1 second and then gone the next. It always made me wonder how people could live with themselves after doing that. Then I'd wonder how many people I knew would do the same thing. Eventually I wondered if I was capable of doing something like that too. All it's made me realize is hypotheticals are dumb because we really never are who we think we are. I also appreciate every year I get older. An 11-year-old boy that got their throat slit in a public restroom. My mom tried to give him CPR and save him, but nothing could be done. This will probably get buried, not sure if I'd wished I'd gotten here early enough to talk about it and try and process things. Or glad it'll get buried and I can move along. I don't talk about it a lot but I've never gotten over it. I saw a hit and run in front of my house once but I guess that's more manslaughter not a murder. I got 3 of them. First one was in the early 90s. I was in a convenience store playing Fatal Fury or some shit and then I hear a pop followed by squealing tires. I thought it was a car backfiring but then I ran outside and saw a guy sitting on the sidewalk holding his stomach. Blood was starting to flow on the ground and a crowd gathered so I went back inside to watch from a more secure location. There was a homeless black guy in there with me who was refusing to leave the store because he thought the police would blame him. They gonna arrest the first N** they see. First N** they see. Found out on the news later that the guy died. Second was ear witness only. And in the early 2000s. I was doing whatever on the computer when I hear a series of pops. My neighborhood wasn't a great one so I was used to overnight gunfire and didn't want to get involved. In the morning the house next door is crawling with police. Turns out 3 college kids were murdered execution style overnight. I left town shortly afterwards. Last one was also ear witness. And only a few months ago. I live next to a biker bar and while it's been pretty quiet because of COVID. There was an incident over the summer where I was just falling asleep when I heard loud bikes going up and down the street. Then there was that pop. I knew instantly what it was. Reported it with the police. Then went to sleep. Next morning the police have my street cordoned off and there's a crashed bike in the middle of the street. They had already cleaned up the body but there was still a bunch of blood everywhere. Apparently there was a bar fight the night before and someone chased another biker down and gunned him down in front of my apartment complex. Revolucion Boulevard. Tijuana 1994. Saw a Marine get kneed in the crotch. He bent forward in pain. Takes a kick to the face. Falls straight back onto the sidewalk. Dead. I was across the street so probably 40 feet away. Next day in morning muster, military meeting, we are told we can't go to TJ anymore. For a while at least. No emotions towards it. More of a numb thought to this day. Which story would you like to hear? I have several. My neighbor apparently was mixed up with the Cardinals. I grew up in NM. They evidently ran foul of them. One night 5 people surrounded their trailer and opened fire. This was about 3 a.m. I was sleeping. I rolled out of my bed and hit the floor. We were at a club for teenagers one night when I was 15. An acquaintance of mine was hitting on this girl in the parking lot. Said girl was the GF of a gangbanger. Said gangbanger pulled out a .25 and shot dude in the face for hitting on his GF. I was walking home from a movie one day. I hear a screech like tires skidding. I look over and there was a head-on collision. Dude flew through the windshield. Died instantly. The other driver was arrested and charged for driving drunk. Causing a death. Sadly I have more. But I gotta go to work. I was 16, driving down the highway in the passenger seat of my mom's car, about 3:30 p.m. Traffic came to a complete halt and we were in the right-hand lane. So as we're creeping along a semi-truck appears on the shoulder of the highway. Door swung wide open. As we move past, there is a trail of blood down the doorstep onto the concrete and then leading about 20 feet further down the road. As we crept further the trail of blood ended with a man lying face up completely covered in blood. There were no police or ambulances there yet. This was on a highway in the suburbs of a major metropolitan area in the US so plenty of people saw before the scene was taken hold of by emergency services. Turns out the truck driver had a partner with him. They got into an argument and the passenger stabbed the driver like a dozen times and then escaped. The murderer was caught about an hour and a half away. One state over. 2 days later. I have to imagine that I was about 5 minutes behind the truck pulling over because the police can be in that spot in about 30 seconds. Being in the passenger seat in the right lane of the highway. I was about 10 feet from the body. Haunting image. 2011. Leavenworth. KS. I was in the military at the time. And a few of us decided to go off post to bullshit around a local Walmart. On the way back. We were driving when we heard shots. Having the training we had. We immediately knew it was a firearm. And not some fireworks or whatever. Turned to look. and there was a man running around cars in a barbershop parking lot trying to evade gunfire. Needless to say, he didn't make it. A few months later, I got out. Went home. About a year later, the Leavenworth County prosecutor called. Said I had to go back and testify. Felt like I was being watched the whole time I was in town. Haven't been back since. I've done horrible things. And seen horrible things. But one of the worst is the sound of the victim's mother screaming in court as I described her son's death to a judge. Fucking rough. A week after I moved to London, a guy was shot outside my kitchen window. I commented about this on a thread yesterday, about people who were nearly murdered. And I didn't actually witness the murder. But I had a friend who was murdered by her boyfriend following an argument. The boyfriend stabbed my friend 20-something times and then called 911 claiming that he had hurt his girlfriend. When authorities got to their apartment, my friend was long dead. The boyfriend ended up being sentenced to 50 years in jail. The kind of scary thing is that this morning I found a comment from another Redditor who knew about the murder I was writing about. Thanks for watching.